Aight, so boom. Imagine you are a black bear in the woods. You are not bothering anybody. You are not in the streets. You are not online. You are not part of anybody's criminal enterprise. You are just being a bear. And then, because humans do not know how to leave nature alone, the forest suddenly becomes the drop spot for a failed cocaine operation. Y'all hearing this, right? That is the real setup. This story starts with a man named Andrew Thornton, former narcotics officer, lawyer, educated, connected, the kind of resume that should have come with better judgment, which is exactly why this whole story gets on my nerves, because some of the worst ideas on earth come from people who absolutely should know better. Anyway, back to this mess. Thornton was moving cocaine by plane. Not a little bit either. Enough to turn a criminal case into a headline people still talk about years later. At some point during the run, he starts dumping packages out over the wilderness. Then, he jumps out of the plane himself. Now hold on. You are already in the air. You already made every bad decision available. And then your final move is, let me jump too? That does not even make sense. And it gets worse. He dies. Not in some dramatic showdown. Not in some slick action movie ending. He dies because the jump goes wrong. So now investigators are already dealing with a dead smuggler, a plane, and missing cocaine. The situation is already ridiculous. Then the woods hand them one more problem. A black bear is found dead. And not just dead, cocaine dead. That sentence should not exist. That is not a sentence somebody should ever have to write in a report. The bear had gotten into the packages, tore into them, and ingested the cocaine. And that was it. Game over. Now, when people hear cocaine bear, a lot of them think about the movie version. They picture some unstoppable woodland maniac tearing through everything in sight, like the forest itself snapped. The real story is not that. The real story is sadder, dumber, and way more human. Because the bear did not choose chaos. Humans delivered chaos to the bear. That is the part that gets me. People are always talking about nature like it is just sitting there, waiting to turn dangerous. And sure, nature can absolutely humble you, but a whole lot of the time, nature was doing just fine. Until a human showed up with greed, bad planning, and a plane full of narcotics. This bear basically got caught in the crossfire of somebody else's stupidity. And the saddest part is, there was no long rampage, no wild woodland reign, no criminal mastermind bear era. The animal got into something humans dumped into its environment, and it died. That is the real story. And then, somehow, it gets even stranger. Because humans were still not done being weird about this bear. The body gets preserved, stuffed, turned into a display. Now see, this is where the whole thing really goes sideways. Let the bear rest. The bear already had the worst day in forest history. It did not need a second job, as folklore. But no, humans saw this deeply ridiculous tragedy and said, you know what this needs? Display value. So the bear becomes this bizarre attraction. People nickname it. The story leaves the woods and turns into legend. And honestly, that tracks, because of course we would do that. Of course we would turn a dead animal from a failed smuggling operation into a piece of American absurdity. We do not know how to leave anything alone. Not the forest, not the evidence, not the animal, not the lesson. And there is definitely a lesson here, actually several. First, drug smuggling by plane is already a terrible idea. Second, dropping narcotics into the wilderness is somehow even worse. Third, if your choices are so bad that a bear ends up in federal paperwork, you have failed on a level that deserves its own category. That is advanced foolishness, top-shelf bad judgment, generational nonsense. And I know somebody watching this is thinking, yeah, but the movie version was crazier. Sure, that is Hollywood. Their job is to grab a wild headline and launch it into orbit. But the real story does not need extra help, because the real story already has a smuggler, a plane, dumped cocaine, a fatal jump, a dead bear, and investigators standing in the woods, realizing crime has now spilled directly into wildlife. That is enough, more than enough. And what makes the story stick is how fast it goes from absurd to sad. At first, you laugh, because the phrase cocaine bear sounds fake. It sounds like something somebody made up to test whether you were paying attention. Then you sit with it for a second and realize this was an animal that died because of human recklessness, not natural danger, not survival. Human nonsense falling out of the sky. And now the story lives on because the headline is too unbelievable to die. That is why this works so well for Feral Realm. Because this is not really a story about a wild animal going rogue. It is a story about what happens when human greed dumps itself into nature and expects nature to just deal with it. That bear did not wake up and decide to enter a crime story. Humans brought the crime story to the woods, and then everybody else had to deal with the aftermath. That is the whole ugly little package right there. A black bear went into the forest looking for food and found the worst thing possible. A smuggler made one terrible decision after another until his whole operation fell out of the sky. And the aftermath was so ridiculous it had to become legend, because plain truth apparently was not humiliating enough. So yeah, Cocaine Bear is funny as a headline, it is wild as a story, and it is deeply embarrassing as a reflection of human behavior. Because the bear was being a bear, humans were the ones acting feral, and that's how this nonsense went left.